Good morning and welcome to this week's Grow, where we gather to recharge, organize, and work here as members of MWEG. We are glad that you're joining us today as we are going to talk about season 2 of the Proclaim Peace podcast with MWEG's co-executive director, Jennifer Walker Thomas. And we're going to just talk a little bit about what season 2 is going to look like. And we just want to encourage our members to listen to the podcast if that's something that you're into, but also why is this one different um, than some other podcasts that you might listen to when it comes to the Old Testament. So we're talking the Old Testament always feels a little bit like a strange land. I feel like that some of the stories are they seem a little bit far-fetched maybe, and they might seem, but what do we have to learn from those, and what does it have to teach us? It's a lot of parable type stories, but also, what does the podcast have to offer as far as it comes to peacemaking? And so I'm going to let Jen talk a little bit about what that looks like and how it differs from other podcasts that are going through the Come Follow Me schedule and following it, because that has not been typically the case with the Proclaim Peace podcast and how that
Yeah.
they've done their weekly shows. So Jen, tell us a little bit about season 2 and what that's going to look like.
Okay. Well, let's approach this a couple of different ways. First, I would love anyone who's on this call to share with us in the chat, two things. First, any stories that you would particularly like to, stories or scriptures or concepts in the Old Testament that you would be interested in having us cover this year. And then because to Rachel's point, this is not a come follow me podcast. We will not be producing the podcast every week, and it's an every other week cadence. And we are not necessarily interested in tracking directly with the readings as people are doing them. What we want to do is plumb the Old Testament for the richest lessons that it can teach us about resolving conflict, about bringing peace. And we actually think there's quite a bit there. So we're really excited to get into it. The second thing that I would love to have you do is potentially share any nervous concerns that you have about the Old Testament. Sometimes, as Latter day Saints, we have sort of a less familiar relationship with the Old Testament. We're not as familiar with some of the stories there. We don't spend as much time in it. We have other religious texts like the Book of Mormon and the Pearl of Great Price and the Doctrine and Covenants that we spend a lot of time in. And so sometimes the Bible, and particularly the Old Testament, don't get a lot of attention from us. And so for that reason and others, it can feel a little bit like a scary text. And like Rachel said, a foreign land, right? So if you have anything that makes you nervous about it, I would love to kind of have a time to talk with you about that today. So just in terms of the Old Testament, one of the points that I want to make as we start that I think is really important is the idea that human beings have pretty much been the same since the dawn of time. We learned that from, the fall and the creation story and the initial relationships between Adam and Eve's family. Sometimes the way the people in the Old Testament express those emotions or the actions that they take as a result of those emotions can feel foreign to us and sometimes extreme. But the emotions themselves, the relationship tensions, those are absolutely familiar. There's nothing truly, as in Proverbs that says there's nothing new under the sun. It really is true. And so we feel like this is an absolutely fantastic text to explore and to help us come to grips with the fact that we're not necessarily special. We're feeling the same things that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Sariah and Rebecca were also feeling, and that we need to learn how to manage those emotions. So let's see. Okay, I love this. That we've got Michael Ann suggested that she's really interested in learning stories about women. We agree, and we think that one of the things that is remarkable about the Old Testament is that more often than not, the women are included in these stories as examples of extraordinarily like just high level peacemaking or the ability to resolve conflict in ways. And there are certainly some exceptions to that, but we really do hope that the Old Testament will give us an opportunity to highlight remarkable women in the way that they addressed some really high conflict situations. Um, so I'm just trying to think. The other thing that I would love to share with you is that we're excited about with the podcast this year, is that because we are in the Old Testament rather than the Book of Mormon, when we did the Book of Mormon, it sort of required us. We had a couple of guests that were not of our faith and had no familiarity with the Book of Mormon, and we would use a story to kind of lean into their expertise. But one of the things that we're already very excited about with the Old Testament is that it is giving us the opportunity to bring to you a wide range of interfaith communications. Like we will have really wonderful people from the Judaic traditions. We'll have beautiful other members of other Christian faiths who have a rich understanding of the Old Testament. And I think they're going to be a real blessing to all of us because they have done a lot of deep thinking about the Old Testament. It is a main text for them in their peacemaking and religious work. And so they've done some deep thinking that is really extraordinary and that we're very excited to share with you. So that is one of the big bonuses of doing this. So one thing that I would ask of each of you is to share the podcast. We did this podcast originally as a labor of love, and nobody was more surprised than Patrick and I at how many people found it and listened. It clearly brought a lot of joy to people. We had thousands of listeners every episode checking in and clamoring for more. But one of the things that we are so excited about with this Old Testament process is that we really do believe that it's going to give us an opportunity to share the role, to share with our friends and family who are not of our faith the high level that members of our faith are putting on peacemaking. And it's really a great opportunity for the members of our church who are listening to this podcast to highlight for others that peace matters to us, that we are working hard to resolve conflict, and that we are offering strategies and examples of how to do that. Okay, here is a really good one. So much war is justified in the Old Testament. It kind of scares me right now. This is exactly another reason that Patrick and I felt really strongly about doing the Old Testament. So maybe people don't know this, but one of the reasons that we initially did the podcast was because, particularly following events like January 6th and others, we had seen symbols of our faith, symbols of the Book of Mormon, stories of the Book of Mormon used to highlight and justify Christian nationalism and violence. And for us, it was really important to say, hey, that is not what this book is telling us. If a book tells you, look what happens when it starts with a family conflict and ends essentially with a couple of different genocides, that is not a path that we should follow. What we should be following that book is to say, how do we avoid that? What are the lessons we can learn from those people? We don't want to replicate all of the patterns that got them entrenched in intergenerational warfare. The Book of Mormon gives us the opportunity and lots of opportunities to learn how to stay out of those conflicts. And we really were horrified by the way that sometimes we saw people using this beloved book to justify violence. The same exact thing can be said for the Old Testament. It does show lots of war and conflict, but we believe that often people have made a choice to read the text a certain way that justifies war and conflict when there is just as much evidence that it could be read a different way. So we're really excited to bring that to people. Okay, and then the final one that I would love to talk about is the wrath of God. I couldn't agree more. People say, oh, God is wrathful, therefore I get to be wrathful. I'm going to pattern my behavior after him. I'm going to be a warrior. I'm going to be an angry person. And I think that the message that the Old Testament also tells us over and over is that is the purview only of God. That is not our role. We do not have the right and opportunity to do that. And then also, more importantly, we want to emphasize and lift up the message that we see that runs through the Old Testament of a just and loving God who is constantly looking at his people as they fail to live up to the standards he's set for them of what it means to be a loving covenant people, and inviting them back into that fellowship. And that is kind of one of the themes that we see running through the Old Testament. God is reaching out to us. He is relentlessly pursuing us. He wants us to act in ways that are in alignment with the best parts of his character, and he's inviting us to do that. So we're really excited to share more about that. Anything else, Rachel, that you think it would be good to talk about?
No, were there any other questions or
Yeah,
suggestions that of some of the women?
yeah.
There's about 17 of you on here that you would like to hear. Oh, here's one from
Okay,
Bobby.
that's a
What does
great one,
advocacy
Bobby.
in the Old Testament look like?
Hey, we will take that down. That is a really, really, because there are some great examples of that, of the way, I mean, Esther's a beautiful example of that. What does it look like to be an advocate for others? There are multiple examples of that. Prophets advocating for God, before God for their people. It's beautiful. We will absolutely pick that one up.
And this was also making me think of when Lauren Pinkston at the conference last year, she talked about the story from the Old Testament, and I cannot remember the woman's name, but she did use a woman from the Bible who was going between the two different,
Mhm,
villages and creating and just trying to work conflict resolution.
mhm,
I mean,
mhm.
it didn't necessarily work out in the best for one of those people, but she was working really hard to advocate for everybody, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I just think that there's a lot of stories like that that we maybe don't read them that way, and we don't interpret them as deep as it could be, but
Mhm.
um, that the podcast is going to offer that to us in a way that we may not have thought about as wanting to be potential peacemakers.
Ashton, this is noted. That's another great one about what does it look like? Because the people of the Old Testament often were living in chaotic times. So what does it look like to hold on to what you know is right, and to be able to advocate and present what is right through a lens of peacemaking in a way that doesn't exacerbate conflict, but actually helps to resolve it. So yes, absolutely. And conflict resolution courage. Yes, we all need it, don't we? I joke all the time, you guys, that this work has been better for absolutely no one than it has been for me, because I am not a native peacemaker, and it has been a really transformational experience for me to have to think about it and to have to live it. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity that MWIC has given all of us to do that. So,
Courage for
okay.
sure, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
courage to speak up and to use some of the skills. I feel like the podcast is just one more of those tools that
Yeah.
MWAG is offering to put in our pocket as ways to hear examples. Because a lot of times the guests that are on the podcast are, I mean, they're professionals in their studies, but also a
Mhm.
lot of times it reminds us that we're all human and that they bring examples where they have used the skills that they're teaching us in their own lives, real examples of how they have used these tools. So
Yeah.
I like that. And like you said, here's one other one. Avoid talking to family members or friends who I know have different views than me.
Yep.
Um,
This is a really good one. Perfect.
yep.
These
Invite
are all
maybe
great
somebody from
options. We really
Native
appreciate that. I mean,
American culture.
there is a lot in the Old Testament about people's coming and occupying each other's lands and warring over that and trying to displace one another. And that I think there are some really robust connections we can make there.
That feels timely,
Okay. Yeah.
does it not? So, well, thank you for sharing that. Now, the first episode is already out, and
Yes. So we
do
did
you
a
want to tell
little
us?
baby episode that just last week that was dropped, that shared a little bit more about why Patrick and I felt that we wanted to pick this up again, and why we felt that the Old Testament, we tossed around different options for what to do with season 2 of the podcast. And this one felt really good. And then the second episode that will drop next week will be with Jared Halverson. And he's going to be talking to us about the how we can think differently about the creation story and what it can tell us about tensions inherent in kind of the binary nature of life. And it's a really fantastic episode. So we're really excited to bring that to you and launch the new year with it. So
I'm excited to hear that. Yes. And there, you can look in the chat. There's some thoughts of other people we could invite um, to fill some of
okay.
those
And please don't
topics.
hesitate to reach out to us with suggestions as well. You can reach us, I think it's the Proclaim Peace podcast. I should know that off the top of my
Mhm.
head, but um, yeah.
Let's see.
So, um, but please don't ever hesitate to reach out to us with suggestions. We'd love to get them. And for both for, um, guests and topics. We are always really interested in hearing from you and also hearing from ways that episodes might have impacted you. We really appreciate that. So,
Yes. Oh, there's one other comment. I would love to hear more about Old Testament themes of creation. Oh, that's going to be coming. An intersection of climate environmental protection and how we can apply
okay.
principles of earth stewardship. So earth
Okay.
stewardship, just all those different areas of advocacy and things that Emily talks about. That would be
Okay.
really fun. So this is all great stuff. Thank you, Jen, for sharing a little sneak peek about the podcast and thank you to everybody who shared some suggestions in the chat. There, if you see in there, it's proclaimpeace@mwag.org. You can send some suggestions there or things you'd like to hear. They're always open
I
to
think it's
that.
podcast.mwig. I think that's how people can reach us at podcast@mwig.org. That's how you can reach
You
us via
can
email and
send
proclaim
it to
peace.
any of us
Yeah. Yeah.
or contact us and it'll get to us. Um,
Okay.
you can even do that or you can even send it to info@mwag.org and it will make it to the podcast, folks. So since we can't, I'm not quite sure which one it is. But yes, so we thank you for again for being here. We want to invite you all to listen to the podcast and then also join us next week for next week's Grow, which we will be doing media literacy, talking about um, noticing and um, being aware of propaganda. So that will be an interesting media literacy, and we have some other guests that will be coming up later in February. So just keep watching for that. We'll put it in MWAG Central. And we are grateful always for you to join us. And the recording of today's scroll will be on Central, and you can share it, the link, with anybody that you think would want to listen to the podcast. And we put in there a link to the Apple podcast, which will also take you, but share. One of the greatest things is if you want to share different episodes of the podcast with people, if you find a certain topic super interesting, you can share it with friends and leave reviews. That is also a really great way for people to find it because sometimes people
Yeah.
don't know it even exists. So we love that. All right. Well, thank you. And we'll see
Thank you.
everybody next week. Have a good
Okay.
day.